My name's Gareth Woodward and I'm the choreographer of a project that has been commissioned by the Imperial War Museum and Inspire Youth Arts to create a brand new piece of hip-hop theatre work we have named The Mother of Tension.
A lot of the senior male staff had been conscientious objectors in the First War.
I felt no fear at all where I was up against the sergeant, the major, the brute.
He was thrown into Oxford jail.
Shouted as hard as he could to me, looked him straight in the eye and told him, I said, I respectfully refuse to obey your orders.
We're creating a commission from the Imperial War Museum to create a brand new piece of hip-hop theatre. So what we're going to be doing is creating a 45-minute, 50-minute show. You'll be working with myself and Jasmine as far as like directing and like lead choreographers, and then there will be other contributing choreographers that's coming in to work on the piece.
What we're looking for is physically strong dancers with agility. We also need you to be creative, not only just in choreography tasks, but in freestyle too. So when we give you direction, we need you basically to be able to create on the spot and not feel intimidated by it too. And that's pretty much it.
The aim of the project was to involve young people in some of these really difficult themes. We're always focused about looking forward, what's next, or looking around us, or social media. But I think it's really important to look backwards and look at history, because if you want to solve a problem, I think you need to understand where it's come from.
When creating this piece, we wanted it to be as real as possible, and really gritty and with power and emotion, and let that be the drive that creates a story, or lets that lead the story to it being relatable to many generations.
The idea of this is it's almost like you're being forced to hold this weapon, but you're pushed, do you know what I mean? Like you're almost just looking away from it, you're resisting, you're trying to push it down, you don't want nothing to do with it. Does that make sense? Yeah?
When you go back, instead of it being like back, 2, 3, 4, then in or whatever, it just needs to move straight away. This is you reliving that same trauma. Yeah, and you're like, shit, like on a reel though, you're like, I can't get out of it. It needs to stay linear. And then you just need to be off everyone else's energy. 5, 6, bring energy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 2, 3, 4.
1 and a 2 and 3, 4. Alright? So we've got 5, 6, 7, 8. Boom, ba 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 ba, boom, and 5, 6. From the top. 7, 8. 1 and a 2, 3 and a 4. Push, 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 push. Step, go, go, gap, gap, boom, and. I think the most inspiring archive that we looked at for me personally was the story of the conscientious objector, or the name given to somebody that objected against going to war for whatever reason, whether that be religious, political, moral reasons,
I think if that situation was to ever arise for myself as an individual or something similar along those lines, I feel like I have very similar sort of viewpoints to some of those things.
In terms of what war is about, historically it's been very much about empires and territory. I think young people are much more tuned into some of these broader issues than perhaps, you know, a generation would be around, obviously First or Second World War amongst others, where just a sense of kind of patriotism is to just kind of head off and do what you're told.
Yeah, I'm not really about conflict, so I really do respect the conscientious objector and how they were brave enough to stand up against not going to war and not entertaining the conflict.
Me and Jazz Jones are playing like a couple, and we had to write, Gaz and Jazz gave us the task to sit down and actually write to each other what these people would actually feel like writing to each other, being in two separate parts of battle, away from each other, away from the kids, this, that and the other. And we had to put ourselves into those shoes and actually write. And then we shared these letters, and then we almost took that inspiration and that feeling and created a sequence of it.
All around the narrative of this conscientious objector and their story, and how they kind of maybe was perceived, the thoughts that people might have had of them, the thoughts that they had themselves of what was going on during that time. And then we worked with Nathan to create that section.
From the research and writings that I was sent from XYC about the conscientious objectors, there are specific stories from people that had lived through this and had gone through different degrees of torture and imprisonment in order to fight for what they truly believed in. I feel that Crump has been the perfect dance style to express and show this through storytelling in movement. Trying not to do in Crump is just stand up and even just straighten up too much, right? So that's why I was saying with this, make sure the angles are there, make sure that turnout is there. If you're like this, we're closer to doing something like this, right? If I'm here, it gives me something a little bit more angular. I talk about Crump, or the way I like to think about Crump is, it's ugly beautiful, right? It's grotesque, and that's what makes it look so good. So we started with foundations and talking about what Crump is, where it comes from, and why we Crump. This was then developed into choreography. We use a lot of strong and powerful motifs to show the passion and the fight that these people had to go through. And then we also show the softer side of Crump, the grooves, the breath work. This is to contrast with that, to show that we're still human and we still have a heartbeat, not just as ourselves, but as a community.
I think the next thing with regards to the process and creating the choreography, we was lucky enough to collaborate with an incredible music producer, Jimmy Power, who worked with us to create the music, completely original score. I think he really added another dimension, and I think the music really kind of powered the work.
We kind of spoke a few times about how we could link the recorded sounds with emotion of tension and how that music would represent that. One of the scenes, such as the gas mask scene, we used rhythmical breathing, so the person sounds out of breath but then it goes in time with the beat. Things breaking, walls breaking, sounds like that. I think to replicate the sound of real tense moments in a war type setting, you'll have maybe a layer of a synthesizer with a string that's distorted and manipulated. Using hip hop as an influence, using wartime as an influence, and building together like a picture that combines the two.
Us doing this and actually taking real life things like the archives, like the different sculptures in the museum, this, that and the other, the music being like created for it. Hip hop theatre can literally merge into anything.
I never took into consideration all those details and everything that was left behind the blinds as if it was staged. So when we say war, all we think is conflict. Two opposite sides battling, but we never think of, but the females were doing the job that men would take part on.
Most men were sent to war and someone had to pick up the jobs, the farming, the agriculture, to basically keep society afloat and to keep economy running. And you know, women stepped into that responsibility.
I'm really interested in looking at women taking up space, especially for that era of World War I, and looking at how women were brought into different services and kind of still degraded, sadly, even though it was such a pivotal moment for women to be brought into those spaces, it was still like we were limited, we had to be limited.
So that then transitioned into the Women's Land Army. The piece mainly just wanted to focus on strength in numbers, strength in women, and it was nice to have, you know, a mixed group of people in that piece to represent women and to represent people that stand, you know, for women and women's equal rights, which is what, that's something that we wanted to prove.
So I wanted to look at maybe flipping that a little bit and seeing that happen through the section that I've created, but also what would happen if that switched and those women decided to take up space bigger and more boldly, and kind of protesting a little bit against the parameters that have been created by the male dominance in that era and in that space.
Remember, intention-wise, you're trying to fight against what they're doing, but it's going to keep pulling you back in. And my peeps on the outside, can it be like you're trying to stuff a big fat coat in your bag? Think about it being really kind of monstrous as opposed to like, oh, does that make sense? Yeah, let's go. 5, 6, 7, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. Yes. So 5, 6, 7, 8. Everyone involved them on the 1.
Yeah, we're living in strange times in terms of there is a war currently in Europe, which there hasn't been for many, many decades. And for young people, this is probably their first experience of, experiencing a war close to home through the eyes of the media and social media, and what their kind of take on it would be.
I knew that when the men went to war, the women took over the roles, but I didn't know that they didn't get paid.
Yeah.
And that they didn't get told to do that, they just took it upon themselves to do that.
They were just expected to do all the gardening, they had to grow all the crops, they had to work in all the factories, they had to raise like all the animals and everything so that everyone like had food and everything. It was just mad to think about. They've never really been expected to do that before, and then all of a sudden they're just, it's your job now.
I think it was really important to highlight the unheard voices from a perspective that is relatable from people that were in the piece too. And you know, people talk about diversity and things like that, and back then it was always, we always championed a certain type of person, or a certain type of person with a certain type of characteristics. But actually, when we looked in the archives, some of that was missing.
You hear about like the bunkers, the numbers, like overall like information, but it's more than just this amount of people got injured in this battle. Like I searched up like, about my family stories and things, and I'm getting an understanding of how it was for them.
I'm only physically doing some parts of the movements, and I'm like physically tired. So I'm thinking, imagine if like I was actually on war shooting. I don't know how I'd be able to cope with it.
We then had to dig a little deeper and eventually found some, I think it was audio clips.
Obviously with the help of the archives team and with Gareth and Jasmine, and then interpreted that into a performance piece was, I think, incredible. It was so powerful, and even though it was abstract, there were clear kind of narratives in there as well.
One in particular was a young man's diary. And in that diary, he had very detailed illustrations of things like a gas mask, which stood out to us straight away. You know, the trenches, a really vivid and detailed picture of trenches, which was also labeled, from, you know, steps that you stand on to almost like a gun handle and things like that, which was really interesting because I've never seen a trench from that perspective.
We use them as reference points throughout, so things such as there was a really great image that he had drew of the mines underwater that kind of, to us when we looked at first, almost had this representation of this balloon that we then sort of used that narrative and kind of abstracted it a little bit as we created the piece, and then this balloon kind of had this double representation of life and death, let's say.
I think it was a really good opportunity for hip-hop to have this project because of the similarities in the political movement that hip-hop is.
We wanted to create obviously a fantastic piece of art that Imperial War Museum would be really pleased to be associated with, but for us most importantly we wanted young people to have the most impact, which I think they did.